At exactly 09:03 a.m., the gavel struck once and the hum of conversation vanished. Inside courtroom 4C of the federal courthouse in Arlington, the air felt overly filtered, as if the walls themselves were trying to hush the people inside. Sitting at the defense table, Camille Rhodes didn't flinch. She had been still for over 20 minutes, her back upright, hands folded neatly, boots planted flat on the floor. No fidgeting, no eye contact, not even a glance toward the smirking jury. Her posture was textbook neutral, but something about her silence pressed against the room like a heavy fog. At her feet, the Belgian Malinois remained curled but alert, his dark eyes scanning the gallery. The service vest on his back read, "Havoc," in dull Velcro letters. Nobody really looked at the dog except the court officer, who kept checking its behavior from the corner of his eye. Camille reached down once, fingers brushing the edge of Havoc's collar, not for reassurance, more like calibration, a quiet reminder of rhythm. Then she sat back, face calm but unreadable. Across from her, Assistant U.S. Attorney Dennis Hall paced slowly with a stack of color-coded folders, savoring the performance. He wore a tan suit that looked expensive and slightly too tight at the shoulders. His voice carried the trained confidence of a man used to hearing himself speak. He made a joke about imaginary medals and delusional veterans. Laughter followed. A few jurors didn't bother hiding their grins. One woman nudged her neighbor as if to say, "Can you believe this?" Camille blinked slowly. Havoc's left ear twitched. Olivia Grant, Camille's court-appointed defense attorney, shifted in her seat. Her jacket was wrinkled from late nights, and the legal pad in front of her had far too many crossed-out lines. She leaned over and whispered something to Camille. Camille didn't respond. Not even a nod. Instead, her eyes remained fixed on the front wall behind the judge's bench. There was nothing there. No flag, no plaque. Just the pale, generic beige of government walls. It gave her something neutral to focus on. Something to anchor against the tide. Judge Richard Green exhaled sharply, loud enough to carry. He'd heard enough. His posture, impatient. His gavel hand twitched once, but he didn't strike it. He stared at Camille the way a coach might look at a player refusing to run a drill. His tone said it all. "If you won't defend yourself, why should we bother?" Hall launched into another attack. He referenced a psych evaluation suggesting Camille suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder with possible delusional projections. He mocked the lack of records from her claimed deployment, said her silence was not strength, but a symptom, that she hadn't earned the right to wear the pin she kept in her jacket. The comment earned a few nods. Camille didn't reach for the pin, didn't defend it. She just exhaled softly. Havoc rose, turned, once, then lay back down. A low, short exhale came from him too. No growl, no tension, just recognition. It was hard to tell when exactly the room turned. Maybe it was the moment Camille adjusted her collar by exactly 1 inch, or when she finally blinked after 37 seconds of unmoving stillness. Something subtle shifted, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. The prosecutor leaned in close, deliberately too close, addressing the jury but facing Camille. His voice dipped lower. He said that people like her made a mockery of real sacrifice, that veterans who'd actually served were watching, and that silence, in this case, was cowardice. Olivia stood to object, voice slightly cracked but firm. The judge waved it off with a sigh. Camille finally turned her head, not toward the prosecutor, not toward her lawyer, but to Havoc. He met her gaze and held it. It was 09:36 a.m., or, as someone in uniform might say, 09:36. That's when something flickered behind her eyes. Just for a second, like a switch had been flipped deep in the wiring. Her hands stayed still. Her voice remained absent. But everyone in that room, whether they realized it or not, had just missed the most important movement of the morning. No one knew yet, but Camille Rhodes had already started speaking. They just didn't know the language. By 10:07 a.m., the prosecution had begun their demolition. The first witness was a forensic psychiatrist from the VA who took the stand with the kind of clinical calm that could strip paint off walls. He called Camille's silence a psychological defense mechanism. Said her claimed identity as a covert operative was a textbook case of dissociative projection. He spoke with certainty, citing DSM categories and peer-reviewed studies. To the jury, it sounded like gospel. Camille didn't move. Havoc's eyes never left the doctor. The prosecutor nodded with theatrical approval. He made it clear this wasn't a war hero. This was a woman clinging to fantasy, a construct of service stitched together from borrowed language and camo surplus. Her written notes, passed to her attorney, were read aloud with a kind of pity. They sounded disjointed out of context. When she wrote that her file had been redacted under Title 50 protections, the room exhaled all at once. The judge chuckled softly, and one juror rolled her eyes. Title 50 was for black ops, intelligence, not for women like Camille, not for ghosts who don't even speak. A man named Neil Lockhart took the stand next, a fellow trainee from Lackland Air Force Base. His tie was loose, his confidence sharper than necessary. Said Camille always played the mysterious card, that she once claimed she'd been handpicked for some classified assignment straight out of training. Everyone laughed back then, he said, just like they should now. A few chuckles escaped in the gallery. Camille sat still, but her left thumb tapped once against her knee. Havoc's body tensed in response. Barely. Then came the government records expert, suit sharp, diction sharper. He walked through Camille's file, page by page, showed the court her enlistment, her basic training dates, her psych eval, then the medical discharge, early and quiet. He said there was nothing suggesting she ever served in a special operations unit, nothing about advanced tactics, weapons qualifications beyond basic M4 handling, no deployment, no ribbons, no citations, no record of ever being stationed overseas. Just a file that ended abruptly in 2014. The defense tried to cross-examine, asked whether certain records could be hidden, classified, or scrubbed. The expert smirked. In theory, maybe. In practice, not for someone like this. The judge sustained every objection the prosecutor made. Half the defense's questions were cut off before they even formed. Camille wrote nothing this time, just sat there, unmoving. Her lawyer's frustration was starting to show in every page she flipped too loudly. The last witness before lunch was another psychologist. This one, younger, smug. She described Camille's silence as manipulative, said people with hero fantasies often remain mute to preserve the illusion, called it identity preservation through silence. Claimed Camille was afraid that if she spoke, the fantasy would crack. She even suggested Havoc was part of the illusion, a comfort object, an extension of delusion. That stung harder than anything else. Havoc lifted his head slowly and stared at the psychologist for 6 long seconds. The room noticed. The woman swallowed and looked away. By now, the tone in the courtroom was no longer just skeptical. It was condescending. Camille wasn't just being doubted. She was being erased, methodically, piece by piece. Everything about her presence, the medals she didn't wear, the scars she didn't explain, the silence she didn't break, was interpreted as proof of fabrication. Her restraint became proof of madness. Her stillness became proof of deception. The judge leaned back, fingers steepled. He asked if there was any hard evidence at all, not theories, not speculation, just something they could hold. The defense offered a pin, a small, unmarked service pin, worn smooth at the edges. The courtroom chuckled. One juror scoffed out loud. The judge didn't even pretend to examine it, just waved it away like a child's toy. Camille's attorney argued for time, for witnesses who had once served with her, for sealed documents to be reviewed by someone with clearance. The judge said no. He'd seen these cases before. Valor fraud, identity compensation. He said the word pathological more than once. The word classified not at all. Through it all, Camille sat frozen, her breathing slow, her face expressionless, but something behind her eyes had shifted. Her stillness was no longer neutral. It was containment. Havoc shifted his weight again, placing himself closer to her side, his body low, tense, watching everyone. At 11:45 a.m., the judge recessed for lunch. The prosecutor was smiling now. The defense was cracking. The gallery was buzzing. Camille hadn't moved for nearly 2 hours. But as the courtroom emptied, she reached into her blazer and pressed her fingers gently against the side of Havoc's harness. Not a command, not yet, just contact. And the dog, trained for subtleties no one else could read, adjusted his body by exactly 6 degrees toward the door. Something was coming. No one saw it, but he did. The hallway outside courtroom 4C was a blur of muted footsteps, vending machine hums, and the faint buzz of fluorescent lighting. Olivia Grant stood near the far wall, tapping the corner of her folder against her thigh. Her client's case was unraveling in front of a judge who looked bored and a prosecutor who looked triumphant. Nothing she said landed. Nothing she showed mattered. And the silence from Camille, though intentional, felt like a growing weight she couldn't lift. That's when he appeared. Not with fanfare. Not from the front door. He seemed to materialize from a side corridor, tall and still, with the kind of presence that didn't announce itself, yet couldn't be ignored. His posture was military, crisp but unforced. Civilian clothes, yes, but there was no mistaking the bearing. The short-cropped hair, the way he moved like his steps were measured in threat vectors. He stood beside Olivia before she even realized he'd approached. "You're arguing the right fight," he said softly, "but you're using the wrong weapon." Olivia turned, blinking, caught between confusion and curiosity. The man didn't introduce himself. He simply held out a small card, matte black, no logo, just a single embossed phone number in dark gray ink. No name, no agency. He didn't wait for questions. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "She was never supposed to be here. This whole case, it's not what you think." And just like that, he stepped back into the stream of people filing past and disappeared. Olivia stared down at the card. Her first instinct was to dismiss it, but something in the man's tone, his eyes, the deliberate way he'd chosen every word, it stayed with her. She tucked the card deep into her folder, then looked back through the glass toward the courtroom. Camille sat still, Havoc beside her, unmoving. But from this distance, Olivia could see something new in her posture. Not fear, not defeat. Readiness. The courtroom had settled into a slow boil by the time Admiral Byron Keller took the stand. His name hadn't appeared on any prior witness list. His presence was quiet but commanding, drawing the attention of even the most disengaged juror. The judge raised an eyebrow but said nothing, giving a single nod for the defense to proceed. Olivia stood, suddenly aware of how dry her throat had become. "Admiral," she began, "can you explain to the court your familiarity with advanced K-9 units?" Keller nodded once. "For 12 years. I served as Deputy Commander of Special Activities under Naval Intelligence. My division oversaw joint interagency task forces involved in black-level operations, including integration of K-9 units trained under Tactical Protocol Echo 9. His voice was low, deliberate. Each sentence landed like a classified memo opened by mistake. He explained that while most military working dogs were trained for detection, protection, and tracking, certain units operated at a different level. Echo 9 handlers didn't use verbal commands. They relied on coded gestures, wrist tension, pressure points on the harness, and line-of-sight triangulation. The dogs weren't just reactive. They were predictive, taught to read breathing rhythms and heartbeat patterns from their handlers under stress. Only a few dozen canine handler pairs in the last 2 decades had ever completed full Echo 9 certification. The command protocols were never written down. They couldn't be replicated from observation. They were designed for zero visibility, zero fallback scenarios. Urban collapse, ambush zones, compromised airfields, no comms, no backup, just muscle memory, mutual trust, and surgical precision. Judge Allen narrowed his eyes. You're saying these animals can perform military functions based purely on hand signals? Keller didn't flinch. I'm saying they can execute classified tactical sweeps, building clearances, convoy signaling, personnel tracking, even reactive defense, based on micro-commands embedded in predefined kinetic sequences. Most importantly, these sequences cannot be trained outside the program. They're not on YouTube. You either served or you didn't. There was no exaggeration in his tone, just fact, the kind that shuts down arguments before they start. He added, if a dog trained under Echo 9 responds correctly to a closed-circuit protocol, it's as good as a fingerprint. It's unforgeable. A ripple of uncertainty passed through the gallery. Even the prosecutor had stopped scribbling. Then Keller turned slightly to face the jury. If the woman sitting behind that table was never part of one of those teams, her dog won't move. If she was, the demonstration you're about to see will remove all doubt. No one said a word. The courtroom was silent in a way that felt unnatural. Not the silence of routine proceedings. This was the kind of silence people hold in their lungs when something irreversible is about to happen. Camille Rhodes sat at the defense table with Havoc at her feet. She hadn't moved. Hadn't spoken. The judge waited, arms folded. The prosecutor looked unimpressed. But the Admiral's warning lingered in the air. Camille raised her hand, slow and steady. Fingers splayed for a second. Then she lowered 3 fingers, circled her wrist counterclockwise, and held her hand palm down, hovering above the table. The movements were small, unremarkable to anyone unfamiliar but Havoc responded instantly. He shifted his weight into a crouch, not aggressive, not alert in the standard way. This was calibrated. His body lowered just enough to reduce profile exposure, spine aligned, eyes up. Then, he moved. Havoc didn't look at Camille again. He didn't wait for a leash or a spoken cue. He moved in a staggered path toward the witness stand, pausing at precise intervals. 30 degrees. Then again. Eyes cutting from door to bench, back to entry point. A sweep pattern. Textbook. Used in combat zones to clear dead angles during building entry. The courtroom staff froze. The security officer at the door instinctively placed a hand on his holster, then stopped. He recognized it too. Havoc moved through the space like he'd trained in it, the way he pivoted without command, how he stopped near a structural pillar, lowered his front paws, scanned, then repositioned to form a line-of-sight triangle with Camille and the judge's bench. This wasn't a show. It was doctrine. In the gallery, one of the jurors leaned forward, eyes wide. 2 rows behind her, a man in a suit subtly tapped a note into his phone. Another figure at the back, older, veteran by posture, mouthed something almost reverent. Echo 9. Camille gave a final sequence. Right hand flat. Fingers curved inward. Then a 2-note whistle soft enough to be missed without listening for it. Havoc reversed his path, not in a straight line. He swept in reverse order. Same scan angles, same checkpoints. Finished by placing himself in front of Camille's seat. Body turned sideways to block her from the center aisle. A barrier, a ready position. Not a single person in the room spoke. The judge swallowed hard. The court reporter had stopped typing. Even the prosecutor, who'd mocked her mutism a day earlier, was now blinking faster than necessary. Admiral Keller stood quietly in the back, arms behind his back, watching every movement. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. Camille lowered her hand. Havoc relaxed. The room didn't. It was nearly 4:30 p.m. when the judge called for recess. Camille remained seated, silent, with Havoc now calm at her side. But in the hallway outside the courtroom, things were anything but calm. Olivia stood near the window, her hands trembling slightly as she reviewed her notes. Admiral Keller approached without sound, his steps as deliberate as everything else about him. He didn't waste time. She wasn't just a handler. He said, "Camille Rhodes led a Tier 2 tactical recon unit, Echo Team Sierra. They operated deep in Paktika province from late 2017 through the start of 2019. Mission profiles were low light, low footprint, high stakes. She wasn't a tag-along. She was the commander." Olivia turned toward him, stunned. "But I checked everything," she said. "There's no record." Keller nodded. "You wouldn't find one. Not unless you were cleared above top secret and working out of Langley or Fort Bragg. Every single deployment, asset report, and comms log tied to her team was sealed under Operation Winter Glass. After Kabul fell, those files became part of a blanket classification effort meant to protect remaining assets in theater. That protection came with a cost." Olivia swallowed, hard. "You're saying she was erased?" Keller looked down, jaw tense. There were 6 on her team. They neutralized a deep cell compound being used to coordinate attacks against NATO transport routes. It wasn't supposed to be public knowledge. Not then. And especially not now. 2 of her team died in that compound. One still recovering, at Walter Reed. Another disappeared off the grid. Camille made it out with a comms dog and shrapnel in her lung. Then came the blackout order. He paused before continuing. "The paperwork you've seen, the basic training? The psych discharge, that's the cover file? It was fabricated to replace the real one. All part of the standard cleanup when covert teams are shut down. But this time, it wasn't just for security. There was politics involved." Olivia's face went pale. "The judge..." Keller's eyes met hers. Green was part of the legal team that wrote the blackout protocols in early 2019. He signed the authorization for Echo Team's deletion. If he recognizes her now, he can't admit it. It would mean violating federal security law. So instead, he plays dumb. Lets the process humiliate her, because it's cleaner that way. He handed Olivia a second card, this one black, unmarked. She's not delusional. Counselor. She's disciplined, still holding to her oath, even after being discarded by the people she served. And right now, you're the only one with enough daylight to change how this ends. At exactly 9:00 a.m., the courtroom doors closed. The tension in the air was quiet but undeniable. Camille Rhodes entered with the same calm as before, wearing the same gray coat, hair pulled back, Havoc walking perfectly at her side. But something had shifted. It wasn't in her clothes or posture. It was in the way the spectators looked at her now. Fewer eyes rolled. More heads turned and held. Judge Green took the bench, slower than usual. His voice, once clipped and dismissive, was measured. "Before we proceed," he said, "I wish to address the court regarding new information that came to light during yesterday's session." Everyone listened. The prosecutor, Daniel Monroe, rose when prompted. His tone was subdued. "On behalf of the state, Your Honor, we respectfully move to withdraw all charges against the defendant. We no longer believe continued prosecution is in the interest of justice." No speeches, no justification, just the words, weighted and final. Green nodded once. "Miss Rhodes, this court acknowledges your silence has never been a sign of confusion or guilt." He paused, looking at her for the first time as something more than a docket number. "I offer this institution's apology for the doubt cast upon you, and for the dignity you've been denied." Camille stood slowly. She didn't speak. Just a soft nod. Nothing more. Havoc rose with her, and then something unexpected happened. Judge Green stood as she turned to leave. So did the jury. Then the prosecution table. Then the back row of spectators. One by one they rose, not with ceremony, but with recognition. Havoc walked beside her, steady, silent, every movement precise. Not just a service animal now, a partner, a soldier returning from a mission no one else understood. The camera near the clerk's desk captured it all. Not the words, but the respect. No medals were given that morning, no parade followed, just a long walk to the exit, and a quiet space finally returned to someone who had earned it. It was close to 3:15 p.m. when Camille sat down on a bench overlooking the park's east trail. The sky was soft with autumn haze, and Havoc rested by her feet, alert but calm. Leaves moved gently across the path. She held no phone, no notepad, just stillness. A man with a prosthetic leg walked by, then stopped a few feet away. He didn't say her name. Didn't need to. He nodded once, a gesture of quiet respect. She nodded back, almost imperceptibly. That was enough. Minutes later, two more appeared. One wore a VA hoodie, the other a retired Air Force cap, then a woman with a cane. None spoke. None asked questions. They just stood, forming a loose semicircle behind the bench. Admiral Keller arrived last. He sat beside her, gaze forward. The videos reached 30 million views. He said, "Congress is asking questions. The VA is listening." Camille didn't look at him. Just pulled a small notepad from her pocket, wrote one line, passed it over. The others first. Keller smiled, gently, already in motion. "Commander, they'll be honored properly, every one of them." Camille nodded once. Havoc shifted slightly, resting his head against her boot. Another veteran walked by and raised a hand in silent salute. No awards, no speeches, but those who knew were gathering. They remembered.